Welcome, everyone, to this pre-summit of the Harnessing AI Risk Initiative. Our topic today is the governance of artificial intelligence. In particular, the question of how the citizens of the world can best reach and keep an effective, wise treaty for the international governance of AI. To introduce myself, my name is David Wood. I'm the chair of London Futurists, and I'll be moderating our discussions in this pre-summit. We'll shortly hear from two panels of speakers who are all, in their own ways, experts in the governance of AI or other potentially dangerous technologies. But first, to set the context, let's hear an opening presentation from Rufo Goreski, the Executive Director of the Trustless Computing Association. Rufo, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you, David. Thank you for this moderation and introducing me. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. In this talk, I will make a case for the creation of a new, powerful, federal, democratic global organization to manage AI risks and opportunities. It will be inspired by that formally proposed by the United States to the United Nations for nuclear energy in 1946, the Baruch Plan. I will then argue that we should rely on the treaty-making model of the Open Intergovernmental Constituent Assembly to avoid the failures of the Baruch Plan. It has taken only 18 months from the launch of ChatGPT for a wide majority of AI scientists, world leaders, and citizens to become aware of the AI immense risks for safety and concentration of power and wealth. What's even more alarming is that the hyper-acceleration of AI capabilities and investments has shortened to just a few years the likely timelines for the materialization of those risks. And that's what the top AI scientists and CEOs are telling us more and more week by week. On the other hand, awareness of the potential upside of AI in terms of abundance, health, eradication of poverty has also grown. But the potential of AI to radically increase happiness and reduce suffering is yet to be fully appreciated. So the stakes are incredibly high, and the urgency mounts with each passing week and month. We stand at a crucial juncture where our actions today will shape the future of humanity and AI. Only by coming together like never before, we stand a chance, by creating unprecedented global democratic coordination mechanisms. But how? Fortunately, we can learn from highly fitting historical examples. The trajectory we're in is very similar to that of the emergence of atomic energy in 1945. It took less than 1 year from the Hiroshima bomb for the unthinkable to become formal diplomatic policy of the US. The US proposed a bold solution to the UN, a new treaty organization with a global monopoly on all dangerous technologies and unconventional weapons and nuclear energy. It prescribed that all dangerous capabilities, arsenals, research, source materials, facilities worldwide should fall under strict control of a new international atomic development authority. Facilities would be located equitably around the world, built by national programs, public or private, but strictly licensed, controlled, and overseen by this body, and eventually extended to all existing and future weapons, including biological and chemical. It would prevent any further development of more destructive and dangerous nuclear weapons, and the governance of it would mirror that of the UN Security Council, which is consisting of 11 states, including 5 permanent member veto holders and 6 which are elected by the General Assembly. But crucially, it omitted the veto, so there was no veto of the permanent members. This made a whole complete difference. So the Baruch Plan would have amounted to nothing less than a federal democratic world government because of its monopoly of violence, which is the base of the state, its federal structure, and its somewhat mostly democratic structure. Negotiations went on for 1 or 2 years, but failed to pass the veto of each of the 5 UN veto-holding members. Consequently, national security agencies were brought in to fill in this gap. We have to be immensely thankful to those national security agencies if we're still alive today, and if nuclear conflict was avoided so far. But there were many near misses, and the risks are higher today than they ever were, both for nuclear and bioweapons, not to mention how AI is going to affect this. and then the Cold War, and then entrenching global inequality. So this failure was huge. The Baruch and Gromyko plan, the Russian similar version, which was proposed at the same time, came about not so much because of Hiroshima, but because of nuclear scientists led by Oppenheimer in the US foresaw a huge proliferation and increased capabilities. And they were right. By 1951, both Russia and the US were already making bombs 3,000 times more destructive than Hiroshima. So this is interesting. Parallel with AI is the same exact scenario is playing out now for AI. The same fast emerging risks and the same fast emerging awareness of risks are coming about. But no one has yet convincingly made a case for a Baruch plan for AI, nor has suggested a 3D making method that can succeed where the Baruch plan failed. But let's talk about China and the US. What are they doing about the current situation? What were the US and China back then are now the US and China today. Now, for in the case of AI, they're locked in a accelerating arms race for military and economic dominance. This time for AI. To date, the relations are dominated by confrontation, mistrust, and disrespect, rather than cooperation in front of a shared enormous threat. The US president called the Chinese president a dictator in a press conference just after having spoken to him 6 hours. A reckless winner-take-all AI race is ongoing with aggressive export control laws and industrial decoupling in deep tech and AI sectors. This is raising tensions and propaganda around Taiwan, where 80 to 90% of AI chips are made today and will be made for a few years, unfortunately. There are some steps ahead by the Council of Europe Treaty that was adopted by 57 states. There's been AI summits in UK and Korea, and guidelines for secure development by the NSA and JCHQ, which amount to a good technical dialogue and for interoperability among allies. Yet, overall, they point to a clear strategy by the US to entrench its dominance by co-opting into highly secondary role liberal democracies and bringing on board a few oil-rich autocracies with a special role for a few allied states like UK, France, and Israel. Meanwhile, China stated in its Global AI Governance Initiative, presented to 150 member states of its Road and Belt Initiative, that it wants to create a new international UN institution to govern AI. It states it will ensure equal rights, equal opportunity, equal rules for all countries in AI development and governance. Such rhetoric is very encouraging, similar to that which we heard from many leading US AI labs like OpenAI and Anthropic and partly DeepMind. But for every month that goes by without action following those words, a doubt advances that the intentions may just be hegemonic, just like the other superpower. The dominant trajectory of 3D making of global governance initiative for AI amount to the US and China pitched in a confrontation over AI dominance and hegemony through co-optation, paying lip service to truly international cooperation and coordination and equality. So this is the current situation. So there is a question of moral high ground. So the US, there's a situation currently at the heart of this confrontation, whereby both China and the US claim the moral high ground. The US is willing even to turn the race on AI into a crusade for democracy and human rights against what it considers a new evil empire of China. This approach cannot work for two reasons. First, the US stark moral and democratic superiority is not shared by most citizens of the world. According to surveys which we'll share in the video, while most world citizens have favorable views of both the US and China, they believe they have comparable weaknesses and merits as political models and foreign policy. Too many in the US equate a one-party democracy with a dictatorship, while underestimating the huge internal and external democratic deficiencies of the US. Half of US citizens believe that the last presidential elections were stolen, while the other half believes the former president attempted a coup. Inequality is sky high. Relative poverty in the US is higher than most other developed countries. Big tech and security apparatus have undue influence over democratic institutions, and that's just to start. While China digital surveillance of its population is rightly often highlighted as a risk of a dystopian future, which we wouldn't want to expand it globally, rarely Western mainstream media reminds us that the US has a similar undemocratic surveillance apparatus for all foreign citizens, including allied states. So this is there's two weight and two measures, as we say that in Italy. Second, even if the US was starkly morally superior, let's assume that, take that as a given. Well, the unprecedented risks of unregulated proliferation of dangerous AI demands that each state, even a superstate and all liberal states, compromise on their ethical principles and preferences, because it is widely expected that proliferation of dangerous AI will be much more difficult to prevent compared to nuclear weapons and bioweapons. Unlike nuclear technology, AI is multiplying the ability of its architects and other AI to develop ever more powerful AI. And nuclear weapons cannot develop other nuclear weapons. AI can, with a wide and fast rising acknowledgement of significant risk of losing any human control. Just as nuclear weapons became 3,000 times more destructive in 6 years from Hiroshima, AI has been consistently increasing in capabilities and investments 5 to 10 times per year in a regular basis over the last 7 years, with no slowdown in sight. So, to avoid what can we do about it? To avoid the fate of the Baruch plan, a treaty-making process for an international AI development authority, so an equivalent for AI, could use perhaps a more effective and inclusive treaty-making model, that of the open intergovernmental constituent assembly, to avoid vetoes and better distill the democratic will of states and peoples. Instead of relying on unstructured summits, unanimous declarations and vetoes, we should rely on the most successful and democratic treaty-making process of history. And I'm referring here to the one pioneered, in the United States in 1786, which led to the US federal constitution. There were 2 states which convened 3 more in the Annapolis Convention in 1786. Such constituent process culminated with the ratification of a new US federal constitution by 9 and then all 13 US states, achieved by simple majority after a constituent assembly deliberation of over 2 months. We could and should do the same globally and for AI. Surely, participation by all 5 UN veto-holding members would be very important and essential eventually. But the approval of each of them should be the end goal and not the starting point of a process. If it is, it would make any attempt impossible, as it happened with the Baruch Plan, as well as all the UN reform proposals since 1945, also subject to the same veto of the same 5. As opposed to 1946, the Security Council has unfortunately much reduced importance and authority, as many of its members have violated the UN Charter over decades. For this reason, working towards a global safety and security in AI, initially outside of its framework, could be more workable today for AI than it was in 1946 for nuclear. The failure of the Baruch Plan was that they didn't want to undo the UN Security Council. And so that's the gist of it. In the case of AI, such a treaty-making model would need to be adapted to the huge disparities in power and AI power among states, and take into consideration that 3 billion citizens are illiterate and lack internet connection. Therefore, such an assembly would need to give more voting weight to richer, more populous and powerful states until the literacy and connectivity gap is bridged within a fixed number of years. This would produce a power balance among more or less powerful states, resembling that of the foreseen Baruch Plan. So by having this weighting on the voting on this intergovernmental constituent assembly, we will go back to a more realistic, not pure democracy governance plan as it was envisioned in the Baruch Plan. So we are, as a trustless computing association, we are facilitating such a scenario by expanding a coalition initially of NGOs and experts, and then of a critical mass of diverse states to design and jumpstart such a treaty-making process via our Harnessing AI Risk Initiative. Through a series of summits and meetings in Geneva, we aim soon to arrive at an initial agreement among even as little as 7 globally diverse states on a mandate and rules for the election of an open transnational constituent assembly for AI and digital communications. All other states would then be invited to participate, with China and the US only allowed to join together for obvious reasons. While the AI safety goals require the participation of all or nearly all of the most powerful nations and most weaponized nations, massive economics and sovereignty benefits will be reserved to states and leading AI labs that join early on this initiative. In fact, alongside an international AI safety initiative, the mandate of such assembly will include the creation of a democratically governed public-private consortium that will build a global AI lab. This global AI lab will develop and jointly exploit globally leading capabilities for participant states. In the long term, cost of the treaty organization and its global lab are foreseen to be over 15 billion. The lab will be financed by a project finance model, by sovereign funds, and private international capital. These all will be buttressed by pre-licensing and pre-commercial procurements by participating states. In the short term, which is now and in the next 6 months or so, funding will come from donations to the coalition, early pre-seed investment in the lab, which we're already having some discussions, and membership fees for states, which will be pushing more in the fall. As proof that impactful treaties can be advanced successfully by a coalition of NGOs and smaller states, consider that the Coalition for International Criminal Court in the 90s was started by the World Fairless Movement. We have some representative here present today, and a small state like Trinidad and Tobago, setting out a process that garnered 1,600 NGOs and led to 124 states to become signatories. In conclusion, the unprecedented risks and opportunities posed by AI require a skillful and urgent and coordinated global response. By learning from historical examples and adapting them to the current context, we can create a framework for AI governance that ensures safety, fairness, and prosperity for all. I invite all stakeholders to join us in this crucial endeavor. Together, we can shape a future where AI serves humanity's greatest interest. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Rufo. You have put a lot of bold ideas on the table, perhaps some controversial ideas, but I think it's clear we're going to need some bold thinking to address the very significant issues that are facing us. I now invite all the speakers from panel 1 to turn on their cameras and make themselves ready to speak. We're going to hear, in the first instance, up to 4 minutes of comments from each of the panel 1 speakers in turn, during which time I'll ask each of the panelists to also briefly introduce themselves. After this opening round of comments, 4 minutes each, we'll go round again. And at that stage, I expect that people will build on each other's insights or, if appropriate, maybe challenge each other's ideas. So let's see who is ready to start. Let's see who may need some help turning on their cameras. Let me do a few bits of pieces here. Ask to start video, and ask to start video, and ask to start video. Good. So I'm going to hand over, first of all, let me get my time ready, to Wendell. What would you like to say? If you come off mute.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you, Rufo, for those very broad comments on the concerns we need to address.
Not now.
As we consider the next 25 years, will the overall benefits of AI significantly outweigh the risks and undesirable societal consequences? I've actually been asking this question at various conferences for the past, 6 or 7 years, and I get very different responses depending upon which conference I'm at, whether it's looking more at military applications or societal applications. So sometimes we get more to the negative side, sometimes more to the positive side. But then I ask a third question, which is it still unclear whether the benefits will outweigh the risks? And that usually gets by far the preponderance of strong responses, and particularly since the advent of generative AI applications. So what we have seen over the last few years has been an expansion of not only the benefits that we can realize, perhaps thousands of different benefits and many that aren't even anticipated yet, but also an expansion of risks that go into disinformation, undermining governments. I think most of the listeners here will know those new risks that are getting much more stress than they had beforehand. I have been stressing the need for global governance for many years now for AI. And when we get into this conversation, the biggest concern is that people are not looking at this challenge comprehensively. We all look at it through the applications that we are most focused on, or the applications that we are most hopeful for, or the applications that we are most fearful of. But we are not looking at the trade-offs and ramifications of the broad array of applications that are being considered. So consider one that gets brought up very often: how AI can help industry lower its energy usage. But does it matter if AI lowers its energy usage if AI itself becomes one of the largest users of energy on the planet? Another example that gets brought up is the many trillions of dollars of GDP, or gross global profits, that will be generated by AI. They get into various trillions, from 1 to 13, depending upon who you are listening to or the time frame that they are talking about. And yet, does it matter if we're generating all that productivity gain if nearly all of it goes to the top 1% of humanity? The present trajectory of AI, from what I can see, is not good. And that's because it's focusing on two things. One is surveillance, largely for marketing purposes, but also the replication of human skills. And the replication of human skills, of course, has all of the benefits of automation, but it means nothing if we actually put hundreds of millions of people out of work. And the distortions in where the productivity gains go mean nothing if we don't find ways for people to receive goods and services if wages are no longer the means by which that will happen. And to make matters worse, when we talk about regulation, we are in an environment of corporate capture, where the corporations are telling legislators that they don't really understand the technology, that they should leave it to the corporations to regulate, but the corporations certainly don't want regulations that will dramatically interfere with their productivity gains. So this is not a healthy environment for us right now, and we need to reset that trajectory. And we need to resetting trajectories is not easy, but sometimes there are what I like to call salt march moments, referring to the Gandhian movement in India, where sometimes a little nudge in the right place can make a great deal of difference in terms of the outcome that you finally achieve over time. So my own proposal is that one of those nudges is to begin putting in place the infrastructure for the international governance of AI. Now, if we're going to talk about safety and security, we should not delude ourselves that that infrastructure is going to be small by any means. Because when you consider it, we probably need, and it's hard to come up with a direct comparison, but think of electricity. The infrastructure that we need to ensure the safety and security from electrical grids is phenomenal. Hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars, depending upon which country you're talking about. And I think we are dealing with something comparable with AI. The only problem is that with
I'm going to have to ask you to wind up soon, Wendell.
Okay, good. The only problem is that with electricity, we know the challenges. With AI, we don't know all the challenges because these are probabilistic systems that will fail and will yield low probability, high impact incidences that we have no idea when they're coming. So again, I applaud this initiative, and feel that we need to move to put the infrastructure for international governance in place as soon as possible.
Thanks very much. I'm sure the other speakers will want to come back to you as well, maybe challenging or endorsing some of what you say, but let's continue to move around the panel. Let's hear from Professor Mohammed Kar, please, Ambassador.
Thank you so much, Chair. I wish to take the opportunity to appreciate the leadership of this event and to appreciate the intervention of my dear colleague, Wendell. It is indeed a great honor for me to participate in this very, very important and timely discussion. It's quite a matter of interest to me, both professionally and in terms of my functions as the representative of my country, the Gambia, as its ambassador to Switzerland and permanent representative to the United Nations organizations at Geneva, the WTO, and all other international organizations in Switzerland, including the United Nations Commission on Science and Technology for Development, of which I currently have the privilege to hold the chair, and also as a member of the board of this organization. The Commission on Science and Technology for Development is a subsidiary body of the United Nations Economic and Social Council, which was established in 1992 to provide the General Assembly and ECOSOC with high-level advice on relevant science and technology issues. The CSTD's mandate covers a broad range of issues, including the promotion of scientific and technological development in line with the Sustainable Development Goals, bridging the digital divide, and fostering innovation and sustainable development. The CSTD has been considering the issues of artificial intelligence and other frontier technologies over the last few years. They received particular attention at our recent 27th session in April, and the debates there inform to a considerable extent my remarks today. However, I must make it clear that the following intervention are my personal views and do not necessarily reflect the position of the CSTD or the United Nations or my country. Challenges and risks of AI as I see them. The functioning of AI systems is the outcome of the multiple layers of contractors, distributors, downstream logistical partners, data engineers around the world. Due to interconnectivity of AI ecosystems, the solution of governing AI should also be global. We urgently need to bridge the digital divides that separates us. Right now, AI is creating huge accumulations of wealth and power, but it is mostly beneficial to a very small, privileged segment of society in developed countries. These groups reaped the economic rewards like increased productivity and wealth, while the risks are unfairly dumped on others. Take, for example, communities in resource-rich regions who face environmental destructions from mining activities needed for AI technologies. The workers in manufacturing and data curation often endure hazardous conditions. Meanwhile, marginalized groups who may lack technological literacy are more likely to be harmed by AI-assisted decisions and less likely to gain financially from AI advancements. In stark contrast, affluent groups in developed countries enjoy the perks of AI with minimal exposure to these risks. AI also influences how we communicate, often creating echo chambers where people only hear information that reinforces their existing beliefs. This can deepen societal divisions and make people more susceptible to misinformation and manipulation. Such tactics can significantly influence electoral outcomes, undermining the integrity of our democratic processes and eroding trust in public institutions. This leads to contested elections and destabilized political systems, as we begin to see across the world. Moreover, AI has the potential to make crisis situations more complex and unpredictable, outpacing our human decision-making capabilities. Automated systems driven by AI might misinterpret signals or overreact to perceived threats, escalating minor incidents into major conflicts before human operators can step in and assess the situation. Without human judgment to consider the broader context in real time, we risk disproportionate responses that could quickly spiral out of control. Furthermore, the development and deployment of lethal autonomous weapon systems could trigger a new arms race, much like the nuclear arms race of the 20th century, with countries competing to outdo each other in AI military capabilities. Reflections on AI control. Excellencies and
I can
ladies
ask you
and
to
gentlemen.
wind up soon, please,
Yes,
Professor.
I'm wrapping up, Minister. To prevent a dangerous race to the bottom in AI arms development, we must use existing international governance mechanisms and create new ones. We can draw inspiration from international frameworks on nuclear weapons control while reaching an agreement on how to manage AI globally is tough. Even when a supportive political climate, there are significant challenges we must acknowledge. One major hurdle is the transparency security trade-off. Any monitoring or control scheme for AI needs to be transparent enough to ensure all parties that no secret AI armament programs are being developed. However, such transparency can be too invasive, exposing countries to security risk. This delicate balance makes it incredibly difficult to establish a workable international control system. Finally, it is crucial to emphasize that developing countries must have a meaningful role in AI governance. This is not just about including various countries, it is about ensuring these nations have a substantial voice in the decision-making process. We must avoid leaving all AI-related decisions to the 2 or 3 countries whose private sectors dominate the field. Moreover, it is essential to ensure that public policy is not dominated by private interests. This means creating mechanisms that allows for diverse stakeholders' participation, including voices from developing countries and developed countries, to shape our future of AI in a way that benefits everyone. Technical experts can create AI governance frameworks, but unclear policies, secrecy, and security concerns can undermine these efforts. And the lesson.
Thanks very much. I'm sorry, I've muted you. We have to move on. There'll be more chance to speak shortly. I'm now going to ask Marco Landi to offer his remarks. Marco is very distinguished as well, as you will hear. Marco, please introduce yourself. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I will try to be shorter so that we will regain the timing. I am the president of Institute Europea and Institute Africa. I am very much involved in discussing the issues of artificial intelligence, and I am very much devoted to prepare the new generation to better understand what is AI, what are the risks of AI, how they should be able to get into this new revolution that is not coming, is already here. For this reason, I am creating special conferences, special event. We have created in Cannes the World AI Cannes Festival. I would like to invite you, and maybe we should have one of our sessions over there, because that would be a windows, a worldwide windows, where we would be able to present most of our issues and our proposal into a worldwide environment. The next edition will be on 14 February 2025. It will be in the Palais des Festivals of Cannes. I have also created Africa, same story of Institute Europea. For example, we have created in Morocco with the University of Oujda what we call the House of Artificial Intelligence, where we invite students and particularly enterprise, to come, see what is AI, understand what is AI, and then we will try to accompany this enterprise into their development for artificial intelligence. I fully agree with the two people that have preceded me, so I will not repeat what they said. I am totally in favor, and I'm here to testimony my support, and I would like, if possible, to have the opportunity to say thanks to Rufo that has given me the opportunity to meet you all. I see too many men. We should have some women part of this team, if possible. And I would like to finish just telling you, please join us at the World AI Can Festival. Let's see how we can organize a very well symposium on the issues that we are discussing, because we will have a very large audience. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for being brief and your wise remarks. I look forward to being back in Cannes in February. I used to be there in the mobile computing days long ago. I'm sorry that there were some women.
Game moved to Barcelona. That's the reason why I have replaced it with the World AI Can Festival.
Very good. I'm sorry that there were some women who were invited to this panel, and unfortunately, for personal reasons and other reasons, unfortunately, we are none today. And we will do better next time. We must do better next time. Let me turn next to opening remarks from Robert Whitfield, please.
No. Then I have to leave.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Sorry.
My name is Robert Whitfield. I have a background of business and the environment, and an involvement in environmental global governance led me 10 years ago to an awareness of existential risk and the realization that the catastrophic and existential risks associated with AI were potentially even greater than the environmental risks I had been addressing. So since then, I've developed programs related to AI governance within both the One World Trust, which I chair, and the World Federalist Movement, where I am chair of the Transnational Working Group on AI. So approaching from AI from an existential risk perspective, I'm clearly very concerned about AI safety, namely the solving of the alignment and control challenge, which is both a technical challenge and a political challenge, and solving the coordination challenge, making sure that safe and ethical protocols are followed throughout the world, and preparing in case rogue AI emerges nevertheless. And I think it's the coordination challenge really that we're discussing at the moment. I would agree with Rufo's assessment that something akin to the Baruch plan for nuclear could well be necessary to have a chance of meeting the coordination challenge that advanced AI will pose. I find it difficult to imagine any way that we can avoid the risks associated with advanced AI without eventually establishing some form of supranational solution that can enforce the necessary controls. But we're not there yet. The dangers of catastrophic and existential risk are mounting, but currently there is not the collective political will to form the governance that AI requires. So we need to prepare. And there seem to be three key areas where work is needed. First of all, in education and awareness. I mean, the surge in performance of ChatGPT and GPT-4, followed by the Pause open letter, provided a breakthrough in public awareness of the AI safety risk. But there is still some way to go, as evidenced by the low priority ascribed to AI safety by some governments. So a concerted campaign in education and communication regarding AI and AI safety is needed. In terms of substance, secondly, what would an effective regulatory regime look like? There's been a healthy surge of suggestions of regime design since the last spring of last year. But there's a lot more work to do. We can assert that AI systems need to advance human flourishing, but the precise regulations to achieve that aim are complex. And thirdly, process. What processes could lead to a successful regime? What are their respective merits? These process-related questions have largely been ignored up to now. And this new Harnessing AI Risk Initiative is primarily about process and level of ambition and timing. It provides an opportunity to compare the process emerging via the Global Digital Compact, where an international contact group on AI governance is currently being proposed. And crucially, these three strands of thinking apply to military AI just as much as civilian AI. From the catastrophic and existential risk perspective, both are of paramount importance, and the risk will only be eliminated if both scopes are addressed. People tend to focus on civilian AI because it is potentially the easier of the two to resolve, but it is crucial not to forget military AI. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. Lots of points worth following up there too. We'll do that in a second round. I'm going to turn now to Brando Benefei, who is actually right at the heart of complex regulation and process. You are a practitioner, a leader of a practice, rather than just a philosopher, activist, dare I say. So please introduce yourself, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. My name is Brando Benefei. I am the co-rapporteur of the Artificial Intelligence Act. I'm now connected from the European Parliament. In fact, I'm sorry that today I will only be able to stay for this short remark because we are ongoing the meetings to constitute the new parliament. We just had the elections a few days ago. I've been re-elected, but especially now I'm here for what I've done in the past mandate as the negotiator of the first ever horizontal legislation in the world, the Artificial Intelligence Act. I want to thank Rufo Guerreschi for the invitation and all of you for your expertise and the thoughts you shared. I could follow part of the discussion earlier. I just want to say that it's crucial that we build international cooperation on AI, that we are able to build a common understanding on crucial issues like what we do with the generative AI, what standards we want for example, protection of human content and human creativity, and how we deal with the disinformation and the abuse of AI for criminal activity, and also for the impact of AI on the military side, where we really need a corpus of international law around AI. This is crucial. We need to work on that. We are doing it in various fora, and also the AI Act, I think, can give a blueprint for a human rights driven approach to AI, where we do not hinder innovation, but we consider crucial to have trust of people and understanding that we are protecting people from actual risks of AI to also enhance the opportunities. And clearly, we also need to deal with the impact on social systems, on the labor environment, on work, and also on the distribution of value, because there will be a lot of added value through AI in our workplaces, in our activities. But to manage these to be concrete, to reach some actual result that can be fruitful, we also need to have a mix of policies that can attribute this added value in a way that doesn't just enlarge existing inequalities, but rather contributes to more social equality and more opportunities for everyone. This is not obvious. Without proper governance and proper policies on the fiscal and the social and the labor side, we will not be able to reach these objectives. I've been working on this legislation, which focuses on the market characteristics to enter the market of AI for products, but we also need a mixture of other policies. And I think that at the global level, we really need to continue this cooperation that started, and today we have a G7 in Italy, in my own country, dealing with this. I think that international cooperation really is the way forward, and so also this initiative, I think, will be able to contribute fruitfully. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And since you may not be able to stay with us for longer, let me just ask a question straight away. Are you broadly pleased with what the EU AI Act has done? And do you think that it's possible to move forward from there relatively smoothly to the larger tasks that you've also touched on, like military AI governance?
I think that this will need also a further strengthening of a political will at European level, which is not completely there today. So we need to have more leverage and more willingness to deal with these topics that I think we still are a bit lacking. But I think that the need for that is crucial now. And so we will work to move the institutions in the right direction.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And to round off the first set of comments, let's turn to Sandeep Waslekar, who's been very patient. Sandeep, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rufo, for inviting me. And thank you, David, for moderating this session. I will follow up on what Robert said and Brando said, more on the procedural aspects of Rufo's proposal of getting an intergovernmental or international constituent assembly to look at global governance of AI. I think there are some questions that the promoters of the initiative have to think. First of all, Rufo said that a group of 7 countries could take a lead in convening this whole process. The question is, what would be the strength of those 7 countries, and what could be their strategic importance? Because if those countries don't have any real assets in terms of AI technology or AI infrastructure, then all they will represent is a moral power, nothing more than that. And whatever they propose, what hold will it have on Google or Baidu or the big companies in US and China? So just having 7 countries which are irrelevant to these developments is something that you have to think as to. 7 countries is a good idea, but they have to be strategically relevant. Now, the example that was given was the International Criminal Court. But in case of International Criminal Court, the raw material that was used was law and morality. And law and morality is present in all countries and can be present in all countries. But in case of nuclear weapons, whether it is a Baruch Plan or I'll give you another example, it is the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW. The raw material is the uranium, plutonium, nuclear plants, and it's very physical. So AI is more like the nuclear, and it's got real companies, it's got silicon, it's got real material involved. And so 7 countries who don't even have this real material. It's like I was once involved in global governance of water. And the countries which were most enthusiastic about signing up on a UN treaty on water were the countries which had no rivers at all. So it's very easy for them to sign. Similarly, the TPNW, I admire Beatrice Finn and ICANN, but 122 countries is a large number, and which have signed it, and it has a lot of moral appeal. There's also legal appeal because the treaty is in force, but it has no practical value because all the nuclear weapon states and plus their allies, none of them are subscribing to this treaty. So do you want AI governance where nobody having AI is subscribing to it, and you just have somebody far away without any AI infrastructure promoting this? So that's one. The second point I would like to make, and I'll just stop there, that when we talk about AI governance, with the nuclear governance, it was very definite, very specific. In AI governance, even if you look at the specific aspect of AI and security, there is this question of harnessing AI for good of the humankind in domestic context, where many times the predictive analysis done by police using AI for identifying criminals can be misused. Or some countries have used AI for facial recognition and ethnic repression. So it can be, but that is different from the use of or possible misapplication of AI in the military context or with nuclear weapons or other weapons of mass destruction or with lethal autonomous weapon, as Ambassador Ka suggested. So what are we trying to suggest? What should be regulated? Is it domestic? Are the countries going to listen if you say how their police should be regulated? Because it's the police who use this predictive analysis. So that is one thing that you have to think. And finally, there are already, even excluding US and China, and Rufo said US, China should come in the end. So even if you take that point, there are three major initiatives right now. One is the Rome Call for Ethical AI, which is initiated by the Vatican with direct blessings of Pope Francis. So, and this has been subscribed by Microsoft and many big players. Second, just now Brando was talking about, is the EU legislation on AI, but that does not include military application of AI. EU was very specific that its legislation will only cover the civilian application, and but still it is there. And third, and final, you have the Global Commission on Military Application of AI, which is promoted by the Netherlands, the government of Netherlands. So whatever any new initiative does has to take into account these initiatives, not to mention the US-China talks or France-China talks and the involvement of other superpowers. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much. Lots more to think about. Now, I'm going to ask you all to be very precise. I'm going to give you 2 minutes each to raise any points. Feel free to constructively disagree with each other or to constructively applaud each other. Let's go to Wendell. Mute.
Excuse me. I'm going to have to unmute here.
You're unmuted now.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. I certainly applaud all of the speakers. I think we brought up a rich array of different points and concerns, and that points to the breadth of concerns that really come into play when we talk about the governance of AI. So the question is, what next? There are certainly individual initiatives focusing on particular problems. I think what next for us is whether we can put in place the first steps toward infrastructure that will move toward the governance of artificial intelligence. The key question is, can humanity do what needs to be done without being confronted first with a crisis? The evidence is not good that it can. The problem is, when the crisis comes, we react or overreact to that crisis and don't necessarily put the appropriate institutions in place. So I think what we can do now is to put in place an institutional structure, perhaps take on different elements that we need, like a global observatory, like the tracking of incidences that of where AI has gone wrong, of creating alliances among the willing, but that we may have to wait for a crisis to jump in, but at least we jump in with first steps forward with people who have considered what the appropriate response should be. So that's my main recommendation for us, is that we put that kind of structure in place, perhaps it can take on a few issues that there is universal consensus on. For example, America's greatest investor said if he was investing today, he would invest in businesses that promote scams. And
Wow.
I think it is true that consumers around the world are being inundated by scams that are getting more and more complex and rich because of AI. That might be a place to start, is an international agreement not to promote scams, but of course there are much more serious issues we need to get into.
Well, we need to take some small steps before we can take the big steps. Is Marco Landi still here?
Marco has had to leave.
All right. Let's, in that case, move to Professor Mohammed Carr. If you want to come back with some follow-up remarks, please.
Thank you, David. And once again, I wish to appreciate my colleague panelists for very insightful contributions. I wanted to touch on what was mentioned on the Baruch Plan. The Baruch Plan points to the complexities of achieving international control over AI and how deeply technical and political issues are intertwined. And we have to be mindful of those things. Creating an AI agency under the auspices of the UN can be considered as a viable solution, and such agency could oversee the development and deployment of AI technologies and will ensure that they are used responsibly and ethically. This body can help set international standards, monitor compliance, and provide platforms for countries to collaborate on AI governance. The other point that was mentioned was the many possibilities for how we can approach AI governance. The ongoing Global Digital Compact negotiations should ideally provide some further clarity about how to move ahead. We're looking forward to the outcomes, and the role of the SG's high-level advisory body will also be crucial in guiding these efforts to ensure that all voices are heard and that we can create a balanced and equitable approach to AI governance. And I agree with the call for meaningful collaborations and partnerships to address the challenges of AI development, to ensure that it benefits everyone, avoids creating new risk. It is a complex task, but we can with collective efforts and strong international cooperation, we can steer the future. David, we must not forget the development perspectives. While regulating AI to prevent potential harms, it is essential and equally important to recognize and promote its developmental potential. The current AI governance frameworks are mainly focused on managing ethical, legal, and social implications of AI. And these frameworks emphasizes the importance of ensuring AI systems are transparent, fair, accountable, and aiming to prevent potential harms such as biases in algorithms, invasions of privacy, job displacement due to automation. These are valid concerns and need to be addressed, but there is a risk that focusing too much on mitigating risk might overshadow the importance of fostering AI's positive developmental aspects. David, if I have a minute, can I say that these governance frameworks may be overly restrictive or bureaucratic that could slow down innovation and limit the potential benefits that AI can bring to all. So the balance is important between regulation and innovation, ensuring that the developmental role of AI is never forgotten or sidelined. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, there's a lot to do, but
yes,
hopefully there's a lot of people who can be coordinated. 8 billion brains if we get this right. Let's hear remarks from Robert now. What would you like to contribute to this stage of the conversation?
Well, I'd like to just pick up on what Sandeep was saying, talking about the 7 initial countries. And I thought his comparison with ICC was very good in the contrast, and that this is different. So we can't quite use the ICC as a model. And my concern with building on an initial 7 that excludes the major players is that there is a big danger that the design of the regime being constructed does not take into account the concerns of those major players who are the veto holders. And therefore there would a problem would emerge as the group seeks to expand. And secondly, I'd just like to echo Wendell, his sort of point that we sort of come up with what can be achieved initially, and then have a bolder plan available to be deployed when that's possible. And I think that's a realistic approach. We certainly shouldn't be hanging around and waiting for that disaster to occur, but to be ready for it when it does, and to be pushed as rapidly as we can, I think is absolutely right.
Finding meaningful short-term steps forward that build some sense of momentum and accomplishment, whilst not just going into a dead end.
Yeah.
Thanks, Robert. Let's hear some remarks now from Sandeep to build on what was said earlier.
Well, I agree with Professor Ambassador Carr that AI governance has to happen under the auspices of United Nations. That is one. The second point he made was that the Secretary General's advisory board on AI can pave the path. So I think he has really shown the way forward. That you have your end goal is a governance mechanism under the UN, and your journey towards that is via the advisory board of the high-level advisory board of the UNSG, and I think that's the way to go about it. And this can be bolstered by what Robert was saying, an input from the dialogue between US and China, and even in this on AI, and in this dialogue also the question of AI governance under the UN has come up. So they are the main players, and they can be linked. And the other issue about Professor Carr, what he talked about the developmental aspects of AI. Now the global partnership on AI, GPAI, with Secretariat in OECD, is doing exactly that. Their focus is on development. So basically, the UN Secretary General's High-Level Board, the US China dialogue, the GPAI, and all the various initiatives for AI in military, they all have to come together. I think that's what it has to be, and that's the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rufo, you've been listening to a lot of this. Would you like to respond to any of it?
Yes. I've been taking notes of very interesting remarks, which on one side it gives me an opportunity to clarify what our initiative more in detail, and also amend it and improve it. So I will start with Mamadou, which basically said that, about Africa, the need for Africa to have an equal say in the governance of AI and so on, and on the benefits. And I think that one thing that Africa needs to realize is that it's unless it is fully participating with decision-making role into the process, and these organizations, they will not reap the benefits. So the title of the UN a report that was done by the advisory board of the UN is called Governing AI for Humanity. And that is says it all, right? You can't have governing AI for humanity unless this is by humanity. So there's a whole process by which African states and poorer states are not going to be in control on the governance. And so we don't have any expectations to see any outcome which is different from for example, the digital divide. Over 20 years, it doesn't cost that much to bridge the digital divide. there are 3 billion which are not in there because there is not a real participation. So really, I think that hoping into donations or beneficial givings by powerful states is not going to play out. And so therefore, and now going under the UN, it's a little bit like that, because the initiative of the UN is just an advisory board. They're not working on the process. It's really not clear about how they're going to go about creating this global governance. They're relying on too much on existing UN institutions, which are largely not representative enough, and they're locked into a certain level of governance. Plus, the Secretary General himself said that it's not up to the Secretary General to design this new organization for AI, but it's up to states, because the Secretary General doesn't really have a mandate for that. It's not even legitimate to do that, because even though Mr. Gutierrez is a fantastic human being, he was elected with the full approval of all 5 permanent members of the Security Council, and basically the advisory board is an outcome of his office. So there is really a very, very weak democratic legitimacy to this process, which is actually can be seen by the outcomes so far. So therefore, I will just, I don't want to take too much time, but basically on Sandeep, he said, China and the US, we don't want them to join later. We wanted to join even tomorrow. But we think that we should be able to go forward even before they join. I think, Sandeep makes a key critical fact that we need to attract in the early stage some nations which, even though they're small or medium, they have some key assets, like Germany and Netherlands come to mind, which have some companies without which AI GPUs cannot be done. And so there is an opportunity for them to join a better global initiative without having to break alliance with the West, to put forward something where they can count more instead of just being and actually driving something which is for the good of the entire world. The other thing I would say is that yeah, exactly, is that well, how do we enable late joining states to have an equal say? So basically, to the process, we have the 7 nations will just define preliminary rules for this assembly. Then they will invite dozens or more. Then at some point, this assembly will have to be convened, because you can't wait for all the nations of the world. But once it's convened and a first treaty is designed, then there are rules for the modification of this treaty that will enable late joining states that didn't participate in the initial treaty to have the same rights or rewriting the treaty. And so therefore, you can go ahead, do something, make a lab, get going without having the latecomers having a less equal say. I will stop there, because otherwise I'll take too much time.
Thank you very much. Because everybody has been pretty punctual, we have time for maybe 30 to 60 seconds of closing remarks each, if you wish. Wendell.
Well, thank you very much. I just put forward some proposals that to your attention. At the Carnegie Council for Ethics and International Affairs, we convened meetings at the ITU and UNESCO a year ago, and we came up with a series of documents, including one which was a framework for the international governance of AI. You can find those all at carnegiecouncil.org. And we submitted those to the Secretary General's panel in advance of their meeting. I think there's still an open question about whether you're going to create something within the UN framework or outside or in some kind of loose partnership. The UN certainly gives you international legitimacy, but may not give you the kind of flexibility we need to move quickly in this particular sphere. But there have been institutions created so far that have had both the legitimacy of the UN with a degree of independence. So let's see how that all unfolds.
So learning from these organizations that have managed to be adopted within the UN, but had also flexibility and agility, I think that's something very important for all of us. Professor Carr, closing remarks, if you wish. Might have to unmute you again.
There we are. Well, thank you so much, colleagues, for this very, very wonderful and insightful exchanges. And thank you, Rufo. I want to end by saying, David, that policymakers and stakeholders need to create an environment that encourages responsible innovations, supports research and development, and education is key and facilitates the deployment of AI in ways that maximize its positive impact on society. It is crucial that the developing countries must have a meaningful role in AI governance. I heard what Rufo said. Yes, I agree completely that African governments and least developing policy makers must step up to engage meaningfully in the discourse and be around the table and not wait to follow. This is not just about including various countries. It's about ensuring that these nations have a substantial voice in the decision-making process. We must avoid leaving all AI-related decisions again to 2 or 3 countries whose private sectors dominate the field. The private sectors are very important, but it's important that universal standards, universal governance is the key to ensure that everybody is part of this process. And yes, the advisory board is limited, but let's be mindful that member states governs the mechanisms of the United States. It's not the Secretary General. You have over 190 countries that have equal voice and equal votes around the table. So the multilateralism angle is crucial and critical as we forge ahead. And collaboration.
And you personally have a great role in that as a leader representing countries that absolutely should be at the table. So thanks very much for joining us. Let's pass the microphone for closing remarks to Robert.
One point that hasn't been mentioned, I think, is just the relationship between government and business, private sector. We know in this area, the private sector is exceptionally strong. There are hugely powerful, rich companies. And it is absolutely vital for society that government stands up to tech and leads. Otherwise, my only closing remarks is that I very much welcome Rufo's initiative. I think it's stressing the need for global governance of AI and helping governments and stakeholders to agree on a process that will lead to effective, agile, inclusive, and accountable AI global governance.
Thanks. And the final words to Sandeep.
Thank you, David. I would just like to say that that this initiative which Rufo has launched has a strong moral appeal because of its emphasis on a democratic and inclusive approach. But I think, and I suggest to Rufo and others who are involved, that they really need to examine the political, economic, and strategic aspects if they want to be able to go ahead. So it's, I mean, I endorse this call because of moral reasons, but I'm not convinced of the way forward from political, strategic, and economic point of view. But this is too early, and I know with every initiative, you don't have all the answers in the beginning, so he'll have to figure out. With that, I want to thank you all and say bye because it's 8:40 p.m. in India and it's my family waiting for dinner. So I have to leave. So thank you very much.
Thank you. But you'll join us again, hopefully in November, when we'll have more time to dive more fully into the areas that you say indeed need more attention.
Thank you, David. And thank you, Rufo, particularly. Yeah.
Thanks to all the speakers. You can stay around if you wish, and I might bring you back at the very end, but I encourage now changing of the guard. If panel 1 speakers switch off their mics and panel 2 speakers can jump on board. Let's see how well we do this. Very impressive.
Thank you, David,
Thank you very much.
goodbye.
Thanks, everybody. So we will be kicking off in a moment, and we will hear opening remarks from the panelists who have joined now. And in each case, I would ask them to briefly introduce themselves so we can all hear where they're coming from, and then offer your comments, panelists, as to what you think are the most important ways forward so that we can have the citizens of the world having a wise and effective governance of the benefits and also the risks of AI. And we're going to hear first from Fola Adeleke. The floor is yours, Fola.
Thank you very much, and good day, everyone. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here. I am Fola Adeleke. I am the Executive Director of the Global Center on AI Governance, a fairly new institution that is working on, two key projects. One, the development of an African Observatory on Responsible AI, where we amplify African voices, African scholarship in the AI discourse. And also, we are responsible for developing the Global Index on Responsible AI, the first index that is inclusive in the sense that it explores the governance development in Global South countries, covers 140 countries, and is assessed based on the human rights approach that different countries are taking on AI governance. And I want to kick off my conversation with you today by building on what Professor Carr mentioned in the earlier panel. In Africa, when we speak about AI governance, I think there are three key questions we need to bear in mind. How does AI governance differ from regulation, ethics, and responsible AI? What does AI governance need to help us achieve specifically here on the African continent? And how can it function to both enable the responsible acceleration of AI adoption across priority sectors in Africa and to solve some key social challenges as well as protect human rights that are at risk? I sit on the working group of two countries at the moment developing national AI strategies, South Africa and Nigeria. And both countries in their conversations are speaking about the possibility of adopting AI regulation. It is understandable that African countries are thinking about this because the EU has trailblazed forward in establishing and approving the EU AI Act. But should Africa be doing the same? Some of the concerns with regulation and that's mistiming AI innovation, something which AI strategies and policies that we are working on in these different countries are seeking to encourage. However, we should be clear on where and why regulation stymies innovation. Working with groups across Africa looking to scale AI innovations geared towards social outcomes, it has become clear that some form of government-led guidance or approval is certainly needed to provide surety to innovators. When regulation does time innovation is where the cost of compliance becomes too high for small and medium-sized business enterprises. And finding a balance between safeguarding rights at risk and allowing for more entrepreneurs to enter the market, especially to help counteract the dominance of foreign-owned tech in Africa, will be very crucial for policymakers. It's also important to note that self-governance tools are unlikely to be enough. So why is AI governance so important and what does it need to do in Africa? Governance is arguably the single most important factor in determining whether a future with AI will bring about human flourishing or worsen global inequality. I'm not suggesting that this is the only factor influencing our shared future, but it is an immensely important one. Other factors will include a sense of shared responsibility and solidarity. It will also include human inspiration and creativity, which will generate new imaginative potentials of what the future could be. What AI governance needs to do can be better explained than what AI governance should entail. AI governance needs to ensure that the opportunity to use AI to advance the collective well-being of human societies and our environment is not lost, while safeguarding the development and use of this technology from harming people, communities, and environments. Within Africa specifically, this means that AI governance must help us to equitably distribute the benefits of AI, to protect and uphold human rights and human dignity and integrity of the natural environment, to develop both national, regional, and continental AI ecosystems, which use African-centered AI to respond to African challenges, to ensure African people and lands are not exploited in any stage of the AI value and supply chain or AI life cycle, and to provide clear lines of accountability. I am pleased to see that the African Union is currently working on the development of a continental AI strategy. My organization is responsible for the drafting of this continental strategy. But it's also concerning that the African Union decided to publish an AI strategy after a sister body within the AU, NEPAD, released its own white paper, which suggests, at the continental level, there's competition about who is going to take leadership on the governance of AI. While that is concerning, it is welcome to see that at least we are thinking about a holistic approach towards AI governance, and what that will look like, will ultimately be dependent on the extent to which, African states, embrace this strategy to implement very inclusive and responsible strategies towards the governance of AI. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fola. Lots to think about there. How do we benefit from competition, but keeping it collaborative as well? Let's turn the mic now to Nell Watson. Nell, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nell Watson. I have a background in machine vision, and over the last 10 years, I have helped to chair many different initiatives for AI ethics and AI safety in terms of standards and certifications. I'd like to mix things up a little bit with a short presentation, if I may, just to sort of highlight some of my own thinking around this event and the surrounding context. I do believe that it is a time for new institutions, and I think that it's been quite a while since our last wave of institution building in the 1940s and 50s. In the wake of the Second World War, we had seen the failure of the Evian Conference. We saw mass migrations, we saw famines, and we saw desperate attempts to try to alleviate much of the suffering in Europe and beyond. Indeed, we also therefore saw the specter of nuclear annihilation and the complete upending of the existing power balance which had existed in the world until that point. The Baruch Plan, unfortunately, did not come to be. However, we did create many very staunch and powerful new institutions: the United Nations to protect human rights, the North Atlantic Treaty to help to protect international security, and the European Coal and Steel Community, meaning that nations wouldn't need to go to war anymore to secure resources. We saw the creation of the Bretton Woods system, and this made investment a much more robust and reliable activity. And that investment meant that we could change the factories which had been making war armaments into those making consumer goods. And we could extend credit to consumers as well to greatly improve people's lifestyles. This newfound wealth enabled us to create an incredible new standard of living in terms of public safety and well-being and immunization programs. Also, the development of effective birth control revolutionized women's participation in society and created options for women which had never been dreamed of by their ancestors. Together, these developments created the most peaceful and prosperous time in human history. And we should remember that this came as a response to the crucible of change and challenge. That darker time led us towards the light. In time, however, these happy times began to flake and crumble. We saw the Nixon shock in the 1970s and the opening of China and its Asian sphere. We saw a greater financialization of the economy, a move away from tangible goods into fiscal instruments. And gradually this started to have an effect on people's lifestyles. We saw the cost of living and the cost of housing go through the roof, and that has continued over time. When it's difficult to put a roof over one's head, people stop having children. We found that people stopped planning their families and instead decided not to have them at all because it was simply much too difficult for them. Governments responded by welcoming, at first, in some instances, migration, but also less welcome migrants followed in a mixture of desperation, opportunism, and hybrid warfare. This has increased many of the stresses in society as different ethnic groups now jostle for power. Moreover, we're starting to see the petrodollar hegemony of the US start to crumble a little bit as a new Cold War begins to emerge. And of course, this is going to put pressure on national debt and the ability to service many of the welfare commitments that states have made. Beyond this, we've seen a rise of populism in Europe and beyond, and we should recognize that this rise of populism is itself a symptom of a greater disease. Populism is an inevitable response, a cry for help from people who feel as if their needs are being unheard. How shall we respond to this? With our institutions crumbling, even burning, we should be mindful that, yes, things may be broken, but they may also be broken open. We can use this as a crucible in which to create an incredible phoenix for the forward future. Our institutions crumble because they are monoliths. They have a single point of failure, and that's what we need to move beyond. We need to move into a more decentralized world, a more grassroots way of solving problems. We need also to balance not just the interests of different states, but also rogue states, deep states, NGOs, and even corporations. All of these different affairs need to be managed carefully and coordinated. Mercifully, we have incredible new capabilities through AI, of course. We've seen the democratization of these technologies as the best-in-class proprietary models that maybe cost $100 or $200 million to create are available for free to anyone only 12 to 18 months afterwards. We're also seeing the emergence of agents for the first time. Machines which are able to create complex solutions to very complex problems, to be able to sophisticatedly sit alongside us and work on a problem together. Whatever that problem is, whether it's a video game or whether it's a complex political, social, and economic crisis. Moreover, we are at a very special juncture in human history because we're not just working with machines on problems that we understand, but for the first time, we're able to work with machines on problems that we ourselves cannot understand. Complex, nonlinear, dynamic kinds of problems that we have no way of modeling or beginning to understand are now being able to be worked on by machines. And that means that we can put these machines to task in solving for our societal issues and indeed building a stronger institution. That's why this conversation we're having today is so important, because if we are able to solve for trust in AI, everything else may become suddenly tractable. That's all from me for today. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the conversation.
Very interesting indeed. Let's move on. We will come back to these questions. Let's move on and hear from Patrick Roberts.
Hi, I'm Patrick Roberts. I'm a senior political scientist at the RAND Corporation in Washington, D.C., and I'm a researcher on disaster and security governance, and I've worked in and around nuclear governance during my career. And I appreciate this group arriving at really a rough consensus around the moral desirability of a more inclusive, unified, accountable global governance for AI. And I also see a consensus around the benefits that'll flow from trustworthy and globally trusted governance support systems for AI. But I think the project and our collective project would benefit from thinking about what institutions need to be built to accomplish these goals, particularly in the short to medium term. And I think that's also in the same spirit of Nell Watson's comments and Wendell Wallach's Carnegie Council proposals for an AI observatory and other structures. These are very promising. I can offer two lessons from the nuclear field, and I think there are lessons from other fields, drugs, crimes, and labor as well. One lesson is technical organizations can come before treaties. Technical organizations can evolve over time too, and that happened in the nuclear field. The International Atomic Energy Agency was created in 1957 in that flowering period of global governance that Nell Watson talked about before the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And another important organization, Euratom, was created in 1957 to establish a European market for nuclear power. And that though Euratom was localized or regionalized, it provided important lessons for the NPT in building the IAEA and other global systems. And the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty followed more than a decade later with entry into force into 1970. And it in turn gave new authority, new warrant, new reason for being to the International Atomic Energy Agency. But these early technical institutions were important to the success, I think, of the NPT and the organization's later development. The second lesson is don't neglect intermediate technical organizations as a way to build consensus and capacity. The early IAEA and Euratom provided a home for early standards, expertise, consensus, and learning to work together. And international technical organizations can also be put to new uses. So, for example, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organization, CTBTO, exists now and is very active, but it was created before the full entry into force of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, which has not yet entered into full force. But the CTBTO still provides capacity to detect nuclear tests, support global norms against testing, and is used for new things such as detecting earthquakes and tsunamis. So there's a role for intermediate technical organizations even short of or before a treaty. The bottom line is consider developing intermediate technical organizations as a first step in building capacity and consensus.
Thank you very much. Lots to think about there too. Practical intermediate steps and technical work. I'm going to slightly switch the order of the speakers because there are some time constraints. Jerome Glenn, the floor is yours now.
Thank you, David. As you know, the Millennium Project did a study and is still doing a study on artificial general intelligence, not the narrow. Our concern is that AGI may come faster than we originally thought, and we're not ready for it. So we identified 40 potential regulations and 5 potential bills and sent them out and had about 299 people in 50 or so countries, 65 countries, assess them, rate them in terms of how good they were, how important they were, and so forth. I thought I would just share you at least the 5 models, not the rest of it. I put in the chat earlier the link to the study so people can see it. The first model that was rated the highest was a multi-stakeholder. This is an international governance system, a multi-stakeholder body like a trans institution in partnership with a system of artificial narrow intelligence. So it would be a hybrid organization, be a human and AI. Each artificial narrow intelligence to implement specific functions and requirements listed in the other part of the study and the various requirements, continually feeding back to humans in a multi-stakeholder body and national AGI governance agencies as well. One of the things is it's clear to me. I just came from Iceland yesterday or today actually, and I met with their Committee for the Future on these issues, and I'm also meeting tonight in a couple of minutes with some from the Committee for the Future in Finland, and we're discussing saying that we've got to do both simultaneously. We've got to do national legislation, and we've got to do the global governance that you're talking about. They've got to be done simultaneously and sharing notes back and forth as fast as possible. The second option was a multi-agency model, which would be a UN agency as a main organization, but with some governance functions managed by ITU, WTO, UNDP, and others. The third one, sort of an interesting one, put forward by Singularity Ben Goertzel approach, is a decentralized emergence of AGI. So nobody would quite own it. It would be the interaction of a variety of narrow AIs to emerge a general AI. Now, that, of course, addresses the issue of concentration of power and democratization of access, like internet and so forth. but it doesn't address the idea of organized crime getting in there and playing around too. The fourth model was put all the compute capability in training chips and inference chips in several locations. This is an idea by Eliezer Podolsky. And so you would have actual treaties for each of these 5 different locations, or however many, so that even Malawi or other countries, the poorer countries aren't that involved, would have access to certain ones. But then there would be high security in these places. It's sort of like concentrating the management. A fifth one was to create a UN agency with 2 sections, one for narrow and one for general. The reason for that is that every time people, in my experience over the last several years, every time people start talking about artificial advanced general intelligence, they keep coming back to Gen AI and narrow AI. And even the documents that I read in China are translated problems between Gen AI and general AI. They're saying it's general AI, but then they start describing something as generative AI. But anyway, there's a lot of confusion on all this other stuff, as you're aware. But we've done this study and getting it out to parliaments around the world to force the conversation. We're not saying these are the models. We're not saying these are the regulations. We're saying these are regulations to stimulate your own mind, because we've got to move much, much faster than we're moving right now. And so when someone says, well, we got to start here first or there first, I said, we've got to start everywhere first. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's finally hear from Jan Philip Albrecht, who's been very patient.
Thank you very much, David, and also welcome from my side. I'm head of the Heinrich Böll Foundation, a green political foundation, and I'm supportive to the project. I've been a member of the European Parliament in former times and a minister for digitization in the German state, dealing with regulation and regulatory approaches to technical questions. And I'm very delighted by the discourse we are having, also with regard to the institutional questions arising. And Rufo wrote in his text about the foundation of the United States and that like some states came together. I wouldn't even go that far back, but looking at the situation in which we've been in the beginning of the 2000s, when it was about to start first conventions, or also the World Information Society Summit and other frameworks in order to set up some governance frameworks for regulating the internet and communications questions. We have to already say that back then it wasn't so clear either. And it wasn't so clear structures also right from the beginning. So I agree with Jerome to say that there are several avenues which need to be taken in order to get things done. And I also would agree with the fact which Patrick brought forward, that often it starts by setting up some technical standards and technical organizations, because you can easily agree on some very baseline standards and very baseline regulatory approaches without having governance questions already touching substantial legislative questions. And because always, if you touch on legislative questions, touching even on trade questions, it becomes far more complicated than when you're on a technical level. Which is obvious. So I would say that entering into also some kind of a competition about the best approach to get from the technical level to a more substantial level, and to allow also different avenues exist next to each other, which is also the experience. For example, I'm very familiar, as you might know, about the whole data protection and privacy frameworks which we have. It's very often that we started with having different approaches on how to regulate and also enforce things in different states. And when we come together to then set like supranational or even multilateral standards, then we can already build on experience, on good experience of certain states, of certain also supranational or plurilateral agreements. And that is what we need to build first. Of course, as Fola has said at the beginning, there are examples like with the EU AI Act now and other approaches which are already advancing. So it's good to bring those talks to a next level and invite different partners. And thereby, I absolutely support the approach of bringing together a variety of different states also on a multilateral level, but not having it too much institutionally fixed and too much already in a form of an intergovernmental talk. So that's my 50 cents. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm hearing quite a lot of support for each other's ideas, but at the same time, I'm hearing maybe too many different ideas, and we're going to have to make some choices as to what to prioritize, which other things might be almost distractions from the key topics. So with these thoughts, I'm going to ask all the speakers in the panel to come back with their own next set of ideas. Fola.
Thank you very much. And I am quite honored to hear all the ideas that have come from my fellow panelists. And I'll just add on to what's previously been said, that AI is not going to be the last frontier of technological advancement. So our governance capabilities must advance with technological development if we are to preserve the values that matter to us as human communities. And AI governance is not necessarily going to follow previous governance approaches that we've taken before. You know, as Ms. Watson spoke earlier, we'll have to break new ground and find new ways to address the complex challenges and possibilities of AI. And to support this, we need research to understand what AI governance needs to do and involve. You know, when we think about global measurements, everything starts with a question. Every measurement begins with a simple question. What do we need to know? What's the status of a project, the quality of a product, or progress on an initiative? And these measurements help us understand where we stand at the specific time and place. When information is gathered, it gains the trust of a community with shared interests and values. And this trustworthy data then serves multiple purposes, amplifying the initial reason for a measurement. So, for example, looking at a human rights-based approach to AI and ensuring that, you know, when we identify countries that are leading the way in responsible AI, looking at whether there's unique factors that come into play there, are there regional differences that need to be addressed in global discussions, which aspects of commitments made by states need more attention, where are some countries excelling in certain areas, and how do you replicate that in other countries who are coming from behind to support a robust, inclusive governance approach? Thank you.
Thank you, Fola. Nell, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I just like to mirror some of the points that Jan Philip Albrecht made about the importance of having unofficial back channels, because sometimes people have dogma, and they have whips, and they have ideologies, and they have us and thems, and all of these things tend to get in the way of actually making things happen in the world. But if we can have an unofficial, friendly kind of back channel way of having a discussion, sometimes a lot of things which appear to be intractable suddenly become workable. And people that appear to have a disagreement may discover that actually they simply have different definitions of terms, which is getting in the way of them finding agreement together. I would like to highlight the successes that humanity has had in the past with regards to CFCs, which threatened to cause all kinds of horrific damage to the ozone layer and the creatures under it. And we came together with incredible speed in order to solve that problem. And largely that has been mitigated, and the hole gradually continues to close over again. We managed to beat the millennium bug to such a point where it's seen as kind of a joke thing that, you know, was made up to be a big boogeyman that didn't happen. Well, it was a major issue. It could have caused all kinds of catastrophic damage across society. But we invested in order to fix that, and different entities came together, whether they were governments, corporations, or open source hackers, tirelessly working to fix and refactor old systems. We managed to solve that problem. We also managed to provide an incredible dampening of conflict in my home country of Northern Ireland by establishing some basic ground rules of how people should interact. And with those, forbidding discrimination in employment, housing, healthcare, etc., 90% of the bitterness of that conflict evaporated overnight. And I have witnessed night and day that changed from 1998 onwards. So I think that if we bear in mind our wins, perhaps this somewhat tilting at windmills seeming exercise may seem a little bit more accessible to us. I think that we can build upon these past successes in other areas and retain our hope for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On the subject of research, I copied into the chat in the YouTube live stream a couple of links, one from Jerome Glenn earlier, his pointer to the Millennium Project research, and one that Wendell Wallach put in earlier on the research at the Carnegie AI Institute. So people who are watching can find these links there. Jerome, thanks for hanging on in there. I know you have calls on your time. 2 more minutes if you wish.
Okay. I think one of the major next steps, aside from countries doing drafts and sharing drafts and cooperating on this, other than that, any country can initiate a UN General Assembly resolution that would call for a group of the willing to begin writing text for a UN convention, not a treaty. The treaty is an agreement between several countries. It doesn't necessarily mean the world. Whereas a convention sort of sets a world standard. And I think that that's one of the parallel things that can go on. Again, we don't have to wait for other stuff, but create a UN convention and then have it ratified. And then that convention could also authorize one or more of those models that I mentioned and so forth. So I think that if I were to make one wish for the future, somebody's got to open their mouth in the General Assembly and say, let's start drafting the doggone documents.
Thank you very much. Nice and focused. Patrick.
Thank you. I think based on the comments I heard from others, a technical organization could really be an intermediate step, and it could build the trust that Fola mentioned and is so necessary. I think it doesn't oppose or foreclose more inclusive approaches or plurinational agreements or discussions around values and principles that may occur in parallel or following. Rufo proposed the Baruch plan for AI, and this is important, a really fertile idea. But setting up technical organizations, what wasn't the problem, with the Baruch plan or the Gromyko plan? I think these can occur in parallel and maybe are complementary. I think that the world will struggle a bit with how to address military and non-military uses of the technology. That's been a problem in the nuclear space as well. So that will require focused attention.
Thank you. Then we hear from Jan Philip Albrecht.
Thank you. I'd absolutely agree with Patrick on this conclusion. And I also would say that, of course, we should be focused, and their efforts needed to be focused now. But having two avenues which are on the one side focused on a technical institution, a technical talk for a room for talk on technical standards where people might be able to agree more quickly than in a convention talk in the UN is a very good approach. At the same time, that doesn't exclude that there should be political backing on the level of member states of the United Nations coming together, putting together an alliance and referring to the task of building up technical standards, building up an institution. So I think that both belong together. but efforts needed to be coordinated and focused on bringing these aims forward. And that's maybe the task ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Rufo, I'll give you a chance to make some comments now, and then any of the panelists who are still here at the end, I don't want to go on too long. I said we'd finished at the top of the hour, but any panelist, either from panel 2 or panel 1, if you're still here, you can have a chance to have a comeback on anything Rufo says in the next few minutes.
So I want to thank the panelists for a very broad array of ideas and suggestions, and so I'll do my best to reply. And I think the basic theme that comes out is the need for a complementarity between initiatives like ours and many other initiatives, and a dialogue among them, and how this dialogue can enrich and also bring them closer, because in the end, it's a global issue, and you'll have to somehow merge these initiatives together. And that's, in fact, one of the routes that we're pursuing. It's not like our initiative wants to be the one, but it's going to, at some point, build a pool of ideas and states and actors which will negotiate and somehow get some global rules in place. And also there's a short term, like Patrick was saying, now since like also the urgency of certain putting something in place, there is also a short term track that it could be more starting from the technical. And in fact, what we've seen doing from the US with the UK summit and the Seoul summit has been very much around that. There's been a lot of discussion, mostly happening in the back rooms with the NSA, JCHQ, and all the security agencies. Little documents came up, but there's a sign that much more discussion has been happening there. And so that is extremely important, because decisions have a lot of technical depth to them, the political decisions that are going to be done. So when the political will come, unless there is a deep shared technical understanding, it's going to take a lot of time. So this is essential, crucial, and it's great that it's happening now. That said, there is a lot of problem that the technical standards have a political aspect to it. So influencing technical standards, it's already politics. You can't really separate it. And so there is already, you can see a major effort by all these technical standards to emphasize interoperability. So the US declarations are all about creating intergovernmental interoperability, not intergovernmental standards. And so they're staying away from creating general standards. And so by emphasizing interoperability, maybe there's one dominant standard that can be easily translated in every other country. So there's a lot of issues by letting the technical discussion go ahead without the political one started. So Fola said that basically there's a need for a regional consensus in Africa. So there's a very sophisticated work that your organization is doing, and also Ambassador Kai is part of, to get a general consensus and have the strength of one country and the other to bring together and try to work in a similar direction. I think that Africa could and should do more, because Africa doesn't have really much capabilities on itself, but it's not really much different from Europe in these regards. And so they probably should try to build a consortium of putting together and build their own AI, because otherwise they will be subject to just choosing a different vendor or align with China or the US. And by doing it but only at the African level, they can't really do it, because they probably need some other nations outside to bring unique AI supply chain assets, and that's why our solution is possibly the best route for Africa. So Jerome talked about the connection between initiatives, which we covered, and also the fact of covering narrow AI as opposed to general AI. The narrow AI, you don't hear that term anymore. Up until a year ago, it was always used. But narrow AI is a very important track that humanity could follow to keep control of this technology. Because if we have very capable narrow AI, which are going to solve a certain task in an efficient way that we need as humanity or as a certain actor of humanity, there is much more likelihood that you can control that than a general AI. And so therefore, there should be different regulations of it. There should be a lot of incentivizing on narrow AI, and this is part of a more general discussion on how we can define standards which ensure human controllable AI and humanity controlled. And so there will have to be a risk limit that humanity needs to accept, by which the risk of catastrophe, by which we are now setting standards and trying to enforce it globally. So Jan emphasized, also complementarity, technical, connections, and building from the experience of states. So that's also now a very important aspect that should be done more and more. And so that's definitely it. And I want to finish with Nell, basically, because she gave a really inspiring presentation. I'm glad that she did some slides, and also the way she presented it. It's a very pleasing. Sometimes having a 2-hour Zoom call needs like a more visionary presentation. And I think also the positive of it. I think it's really. We should hire Nell to do the branding and marketing for our initiative, because our title is Harnessing AI Risk Initiative. So our whole intuition is that we can expect to create global institutions that were really away from were just dreams, just because we have these incredible risks. Just like in 1946, in the 40s, now we had the UN, and we were close to create the Baruch Plan. So it is an incredible opportunity, and there's a dire need for the positive narrative, because basically you can push people to action because of the risk, but there is as much drive and incentives that can come out from the incredible benefits that we can all get if we basically overcome the risks. And there is a lot of people that don't respond well to risks. They want to ignore it. There's a lot of states, citizens, and so on and so forth. No, even in my close social circle and family, people just don't want to hear about this stuff, right? And so if you're moving towards something great, it's better. So I don't want to take too long, because maybe there's a small round. I just want to take opportunity to thank all of you for these great contributions. Hopefully we can do that more in writing, in person, in November, and all that. I'll pass my word to David.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to give the remaining panelists from both panel 2 and panel 1 a chance, if they wish, to make some final remark. My own final remark is, my goodness, I'm going to have to watch the recording of this, because there were so many fascinating ideas. And just as I was thinking about one, there was another fascinating idea which jammed it out of my brain. So please look for the recording of this. We'll send around the links. Let's hear some final thoughts, if you wish. Fola.
Thank you very much again for the opportunity to be part of this conversation. Just following on what Rufo just said, in regions such as Africa, where we are still far behind the curve in the development of technologies. When we think about governance, we need to think about it in a broader sense, bigger than the technology itself. So for example, how do we establish governance innovation that addresses the digital divide in Africa, such as reliable and affordable access to energy and the internet in the first place? How do we facilitate access to data through measures such as open data or data stewardship? And how do we invest in Afrocentric data sets and look to partnerships in the private sector and with other countries who can support this mission? Thank you again.
Thank you. Nell.
I'd just like to mention that these new agentic AI models are coming quite soon. The big tech companies already have them, but they haven't been opened up much to the public just yet. But we are soon to see another kind of Sputnik-style moment, as we did with ChatGPT not too long ago. And I think that this is perhaps a good moment. The imminent emergence of agentic AI will be a good moment to rally people to come around and to have these conversations together. So let's be ready for that when it happens, because it's coming soon. Thank you.
It's coming soon. We need to be ready. Patrick.
And I hope this group and many others will keep pushing for more inclusive, broader, more creative ideas for global governance using new digital technology, new ways of thinking as we face threats to humanity, to the planet. So I look forward to seeing more of that.
Let's keep the initiative going. Jan Philip.
Thank you very much once again to you, David, and also to Rufo and all the other panelists. I also enjoyed Nell's presentation very much. And I have to say, of course, one of the things which have changed is that when we talked about the challenges of the past, it's been often challenges by public actors, by state actors. And now we are obviously talking about private entities and a market question, a market regulation question, which is underlying here. And that requests that we look beyond and onto new avenues when getting into the right approach for governance in this sector. And it's needed that we also get private actors on board in order to talk with us about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Wendell, and then Robert.
Well, thank you. This was a wonderful discussion and many good proposals came forward. I thought it just might be helpful if I took a minute and outlined the 5 symbiotic components that were recommended after our 3 experts workshops at UNESCO and the ITU about a year ago. The first was a neutral technical organization to sort through which legal frameworks, best practices, and standards have risen to the highest level of global acceptance. The second was a global AI observatory, which would perform many functions, among which would be to orchestrate global debate, to produce an annual report on the state of AI, to maintain various registries, a registry of adverse incidences and a registry of new and emerging, where possible, anticipated applications. And a third registry would track the history of AI systems. A fourth registry would be global repository for data, code, and model provenance. And then a normative governance capability with limited enforcement powers. Fourth, a conformity assessment and process certification toolbox to promote responsible behavior and assist with confidence building measures. And finally, the development of technological tools for governance and ensuring safety and making these universally available.
So we're going to have to get this information spread more widely. This isn't a conversation that's starting from scratch. This is a conversation that can build on lots of very thorough, thoughtful work that's already been done. Let's spread that around, but then let's also, where necessary, do new things, because the forthcoming steps up in AI capability, they're like some past disruptions, but they're also unique with very special capabilities. So thanks to everybody who's been speaking, and if there's nobody else who's got something burning to say, I propose to close down this live stream. Robert.
I'm sorry, I thought I was around. After your eloquence, just a quick point. It was a fascinating discourse, but what it focused on primarily is civilian AI. And I'll just reiterate what I said earlier, that I think it's crucial that we focus in parallel with addressing civilian AI, we address military AI, because it's much more difficult. It's behind the screens, it's much more confidential. So people tend to say, well, that's too difficult. Let's focus on the civilian. But quite apart from the products, what people do talk about, the lethal autonomous weapons, the military weapon products, but some of the other types of risk, the danger in military labs of triggering rogue AI, the possibility of accidents, the possibility of bad actors, the possibility of power grabs where you get nude, all these things can occur just as much within the military sphere as the civilian sphere. So it's crucial that we address both the civilian and the military in parallel.
And on that subject, I'll mention the name Leopold Aschenbrenner, who you may not have heard of. He left DeepMind recently. He was on the super alignment team. He has issued a short book and done a 4-hour-long podcast with Dwarkesh, in which he talks at length about the coming involvement of deep state of all sorts, the military, GCHQ, and the NSA and others, in taking control, perhaps, of all the AI labs because of the huge significance to national security. It could change the conversation yet further. If you haven't seen that already, maybe you should dip into that, as well as listening to the remarks that have been said by the speakers here. So I'm going to close down the live stream now. Thanks to everybody for watching. Keep attention for more news about the Harnessing AI Risk Initiative. Goodbye.
Thank you, David, for a great
All right. Thanks, Rupo.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
All right.